Big 12 fans didn't love the March Madness bracket, but people are saying BYU can still be an Elite Eight team. How? This is a Locked On Big 12 Locked On Cougars crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12 Locked On Cougars crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. And that's Jake Hatch of Locked On BYU Cougars. Thanks for making our shows your first listen every single day. We will start BYU, despite the last 48 hours being just a pity party for the Cougars facing VCU in round one and looking at the way their bracket shook out, how they can still make the Elite Eight or Final Four. Even Jay Wright thinks so. Then, is March Madness all of a sudden rigged against the Big 12? Was the selection process flawed? West Virginia looking at you. We'll go through how the Big 12's been so dominant, but it didn't feel that way on Sunday. And BYU seeding is directly correlated to faith? That's the question. Is it the case? All of that and more here on the Locked On Big 12 Locked On Cougars crossover. If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs. All right, let's jump in. VCU in round one, Jake. I know BYU fans are not very happy with this matchup, not very happy being a 6 seed. Before we tell you why BYU could be a long-term team in March, what was the immediate reaction of this announcement?
A lot of Cougar fans you mentioned were upset because there was some thought the BYU, Joe Lunardi, and other bracketologists had them as a 5 seed. It felt like the 9-0 run they had to close out the regular season, and obviously that win over Iowa State in the Big 12 tournament, felt like that pushed them firmly onto the 5 line, Drake. And then it comes out that the number 1 6 team, so they're just one spot out of being a 5 seed. But then you add VCU to the mix, which is a top 30 KenPom team, a very defensive-oriented squad, much like last year's opponent in Duquesne from the A-10 that BYU thought they were going to roll past and ultimately got done in by. Yeah, Cougar fans rightfully upset with how the seeding worked out in their favor.
Does BYU, as a 6 seed, we know that historically that has not gone very well for the Cougars. Does BYU as a program, what you've heard from Kevin Young, feel as though it got slighted, or is this something that instead of drawing, angst from the team, the Cougars can rally around?
It is something they can rally around. Frankly, Kevin Young's comments about the matter made it seem like he doesn't give one you-know-what about the seeding. He just wants to get after it. Now, he's had kind of that mentality ever since taking over as head coach at BYU. He doesn't care about history. He wants to go and make history in his own right because this is his first year at the helm of the BYU basketball program. He's never been in an NCAA tournament. He says he's always been a big fan of watching the tournament, and he's excited to be part of it. It just feels like he doesn't care that BYU hasn't advanced past the first round since the Jimmer Fredette era in 2011. And I think that mentality, hey, who cares what's happened in the recent past? Let's go out and do our thing. I think that mentality absolutely could benefit BYU by ignoring some of their failings in the recent past.
Yeah, if you ask ESPN right now, BYU has a 57% chance to win this game against VCU. Say that BYU, and the way that I put it, because these two teams have stark contrast in the way they play, BYU will go quick. I had somebody comment recently, BYU is a live by the 3, die by the 3 team. I disagree with that. I don't think that's the case this year. It was more so under Mark Pope. It is not under Kevin Young. They play an NBA style from behind the arc, but it's not live or die there. VCU will try to slow this game down. They will try to pace this thing out, and they're very good. I've talked about this. If you ask Haslametrics, with consistency. BYU is great at momentum. VCU good at consistency. This is a game you play 10 times. BYU, to me, wins it 5 out of those 10 times, 50%, because either rock, meet hard place, whatever have you, fast versus slow. If BYU is on the right side of this matchup, though, now we're talking either Wisconsin or Montana, St. Mary's, Vanderbilt, even Alabama, who I think is one of the less dangerous 2 seeds out there. I don't mind the way the rest of this shakes out for BYU and their opportunity to get to an Elite Eight in the East.
Well, I'm with you, Drake. Here's the deal. I think that VCU game is the scariest of the bunch for BYU right now because Just the way that VCU plays. You mentioned the fact that they're going to want to slow this game down. BYU is a team that likes to run. They like to play like an NBA team, as you mentioned. Either everything's at the rim or beyond the arc. That's the way that BYU has scored their points this season. And if you can get past VCU, no matter how it comes, I don't mind facing off against Wisconsin or Montana. And then you mentioned the St. Mary's, Vanderbilt, Alabama combo there. All of those have potential for BYU to handle their business and advance to the Elite Eight. So it's crazy to think this, but I really do think this first round matchup is the scariest of the bunch for BYU at this juncture. And then you get past that and see what you can do beyond that, because it feels like it's setting up. If you can get past the first round, you can make a deep run here.
Do you think if BYU gets past VCU, there's another squad? I know we looked at again, Wisconsin, Montana, St. Mary's, Vanderbilt. One of those that you circle and say, shoot, based on how this all has gone, we can't play X, or BYU's really in trouble?
It's St. Mary's. Now, BYU has a long history with St. Mary's from their West Coast Conference membership, but funny enough, BYU had more success against Gonzaga during their West Coast Conference era than they did St. Mary's. Randy Bennett knows the Cougars. He knows how to play against BYU, and it's a very physical brand that St. Mary's brings to the table. If you were to say it's BYU and St. Mary's matching up with that chance to go deep in this tournament, I'd be terrified. That's the one team I'm most scared of. Alabama, they're much like BYU, a lot of offense, want to push the tempo. I actually wouldn't mind BYU squaring off against them. I think it's the same thing against Vanderbilt. I like BYU's chances against some of these SEC squads, but it's crazy to think about it, but St. Mary's scares me the most.
I love the fact that BYU got to avoid Florida and Auburn. They're looking at Duke if they go to the Elite Eight. I wanted to stay away, even though Auburn has lost 3 of 4, stay away from those two schools, specifically Florida being the A1 for me. I just don't want to be anywhere near Florida. And even Houston, I know a lot of people are touting Duke as their national champion, but I would rather play Duke than Houston, especially knowing Cooper Flagg might only be 80%, 90%. Do you think that if BYU gets to a Duke or even an Arizona again in the Elite Eight, that this Cougars team could become a Final Four squad?
They could. Now, obviously, you've got to handle your business before getting there. But yeah, the Dukes, the Arizonas of the world, you look at the way that this bracket shakes out, Drake, there are teams there that BYU matches up against favorably, because BYU's real weakness has been ultra physical teams like a Houston. You want to avoid that. That's what a Florida, for example, could do to BYU. I look at Duke. I look at an Oregon and Arizona on the top side of that bracket and say, if BYU gets that far, I like the matchups here. And I really do think you can squeeze past this VCU team in the first round. BYU has got a lot of opportunity to make noise here in March, and that's something we haven't been able to say for quite some time.
Well, the Cougars will get to tee off this weekend, and they will not, no matter what. They will not play on Sunday. Is that something that impacted their seeding? We'll actually go there later on in the show. Coming up next, is the March Madness selection process flawed or against the Big 12? There are conspiracy theories being floated out there. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey there. Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. And I love touting Nissan because I drive one. 2016 Nissan Maxima, to be exact. If you see it, wave at me. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. Top-seeded stars, unexpected upsets. They showcase strength and power. This week, it's the Florida Gators. The Gators, led by Walter Clayton, 17 points a game, dominated the SEC tournament, winning each game by at least 9 points. When it comes to that Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. That's exactly what the Gators have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out there ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Armada, Rogue, Pathfinder. Go find your big adventure with Nissan at shopnissanusa.com. That is shopnissanusa.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps. Before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch, be covered in less than 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. Peace of mind. As a parent, you can make sure your family's financially protected. Affordable coverage. Get millions of dollars in coverage for less than $1 a day. And Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investments. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Price subject to underwriting and health questions. That is Fabric. Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars talking all things BYU. As you look at the March Madness bracket this time around, obviously, unsurprisingly, the SEC got a whole lot of love based on what we've heard, not just in college football, but now college basketball from national pundits. Does it feel like the committee got it backwards when you look at the fact the Big 12 is still the best league in college basketball 9 of the last 11 years, and at the first opportunity to do so, they flipped that to favor the Big 10 and the SEC?
I hate to be the conspiracy theorist here, Drake, but it feels like the big brands are throwing their weight around once again. And yet again, the SEC and the Big 10 get the benefit of the doubt. You and I were obviously Big 12 stands. We're always going to stand up for our league. But yeah, it sure feels like the Big 12 got hosed pretty hard. None more so in my mind than West Virginia. Looking at what the Mountaineers had done, they feel like they should have been in this tournament. I think they should have been in this tournament. The Big 12 should have had 8 teams. 14 teams from the SEC goes in line with that whole storyline all season long. Shame. I like that. That's well done. Whoever put that up. I love that. But the thing is, the SEC, we heard all season long, Drake, hey, they're so good. They're so good. Ken Pomeroy has the gall, and obviously Ken lives here in the greater Utah area, and I've become a close acquaintance of his over the years. He writes a blog post saying, hey, the SEC might be a tad bit overrated. What does the SEC do? Greg Sankey has the audacity to be like, who is this Ken Pomeroy and why is he ripping my league? It told me everything I need to know. The SEC's throwing its weight around, trying to make sure that they are the big dog for everybody to understand that we own college sports, and I hope they fall flat on their face.
Yeah, that has been a big piece of contention here, the treatment of SEC schools. And really, Jake, not even that right now. I'm also looking at North Carolina, at some of these Big 10 teams, the way that they were offered pretty favorable spots in March Madness this year. And as much as I want to say the ACC was historically bad, they are. There's no way to argue that. Still, North Carolina gets in over West Virginia, as you just mentioned. And then whose athletic director is up there justifying this? Boo Kerrigan of North Carolina.
Yeah, okay, here's the deal. It's a really, really bad look. North Carolina having their sitting athletic director be the tournament committee chairman, and he can say all he wants, Drake. Well, I wasn't in those meetings when we were brought up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, guess what? You can excuse yourself from the meeting. That you have to do that. But here's the deal. Everybody in that room has this sense of, hey, so, Boo over there, he happens, be North Carolina's AD, and North Carolina being this blue blood that they are, CBS wants these blue bloods in. It's a really, really bad look. You can't defend it. North Carolina was 1-12 in their Q1 games this year. You mentioned the ACC, historically bad. I think you mentioned it not too long ago. The ACC didn't have a single ranked versus ranked game the entire conference season. I know that Duke's elite. I know there's some elite teams in the ACC, but as a league, pretty rough year for one of the traditionally strong basketball leagues out there. And to have North Carolina make it in over the likes of a West Virginia, in Indiana, even a Boise State out here in the western part of the United States, it's a really, really bad look to have them in the field and have their AD be the sitting committee chair.
Can we put in perspective here? The SEC getting 14 in, the Big 10 got 8, Big 12 at 7. Prior to the Big 12 at 7, prior to this, that 70% was up there for one of the best percentages all time for a league in college basketball history. Now the SEC gets, I can't do 14 out of 16. I can't do the percentage, but I can tell you that is a record for teams by 3. What blows my mind, Jake, is it feels as though the committee takes a league that did well in the non-conference, that did well early in the year for 13 games. All of you went 12-1, 11-2, and had some good wins. And from there, it's like you couldn't be docked for beating each other. It's why we dock the Big 12 in football all the time. And in basketball, in the case of West Virginia. But in the SEC, they went 500 as a league because, of course, they did. It's what you have to do as a conference. And so no one was really docked, despite regressing over the course of the year. Their conference affiliation got to help them keep their status. And in the end, they get 14. No matter what, there's zero way they are that generational for 14 out of 16 to be in.
Okay, here's the deal. And all due respect, I'm going to pick on our friend John Williams of Locked On Sooners. I am sorry. Oklahoma, were they 6-12 in conference, Drake? How in the you-know-what do they get a 9 seed as a 6-12 team in the SEC? And that's just one example here. I do not understand the philosophy the tournament committee had here outside of buying into the narrative out there about how good the SEC has been. But you're right. They were a 500 league in terms of their conference record, and that should not reward you with a record amount of teams making the NCAA tournament. I'm sorry. It does not math in my mind. And I'm going to back up my guy, Ken Pomeroy. He had the stones to come out ahead of all of this and say, hey, the metrics say the SEC is a bit overrated here. Greg Sankey freaks out and immediately fires back at him. I'm telling you, Ken Pom knows something, and I'm right in line with him. I think the SEC is poised to fall on their face, and I hope that they have a bad showing, because this is a really, really bad look to see them get 14 teams in, because they're just not that good of a league.
Why do you think, I mean, I know you mentioned, or we've hypothesized that the SEC status as someone the major TV networks looks fondly toward, why do you think they're able to get away with this? Is it just the haves can continue to have, and as the have-nots complain, will it fall on deaf ears?
Well, and the funny thing about this, Drake, is CBS and Viacom, they're obviously the big dog when it comes to the NCAA tournament. Like they air all these games. They're on those networks. You would have thought a thing like the SEC football being ripped away from CBS might have had CBS thinking, hey, we're going to stick it to the SEC. Well, conversely, they are all of a sudden rewarding everything SEC. So for the life of me, I don't understand it. You're right. That just doesn't seem like this is the banner type season that some would make you out to believe it is, with these 14 teams getting into the NCAA tournament. We could see 7 of them done after the first round, it feels like, and there would still be SEC honks out there who are like, see, we're absolutely elite. And I'm like, well, you're still 500. 7 teams won, 7 teams lost. Yet again, right in line with the 500 record you guys had all conference season long.
Yeah, it's odd to see the way that the SEC is loved now in basketball after the Big 12 was so dominant for so long, and that's been thrown out the window. How quickly we forgot the elite status of the Big 12 conference, and it hurt ultimately schools like BYU or Iowa State, who are fighting there really late to get better seeds, or West Virginia, who was left out in total because they thought an SEC team or that extra big brand from the ACC deserved to be in March Madness. Coming up, is there a... What's up, Jake?
I just want to inject one more thing on this. I have always been a guy who obviously I'm gonna rep for BYU because that's my show that I do here, Drake. This year more than ever, I am back in the Big 12. Every Big 12 team, you've got a super fan in Jake Hatch. I want nothing more than the Big 12 to go out and put a statement. And I'm talking to everybody. I hope they all advance and stick it to the powers that be.
I think the entire Big 12 was an agreement that West Virginia was hosed in this entire deal, and a lot of people coming out of the woodworks from all fan bases to voice that over the last couple of days. Coming up, BYU is a 6 seed. They can't play on a Sunday. Is there something to this? Is there a religious reason BYU was overlooked by the committee? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Monarch Money is spectacular. Look, I turned 24 a couple of weeks ago. I'm trying to figure out the whole money thing, and Monarch Money has been great. If you check your bank account, you wonder, where did all my money go? Dining out, online, shopping, entertainment, you lose track. Monarch Money comes in here, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, complete financial command center. Track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. Stop managing your money and start building wealth. Surprising insights. When I started Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on DoorDash and food delivery and stuff like that. And it's convenient because you can juggle multiple apps and throw those away. Use Monarch, the one app for tracking finances, spending, and even planning long-term goals. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever, where you can track shared personal accounts. Take control of your finances, Monarch Money. Use Locked On College at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first entire year. That's monarchmoney.com. Use code Locked On College for half off your first year with Monarch Money. Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars, talking all things BYU every day. We have talked about how BYU was slighted by being a 6 seed, but it was also brought up. It's been brought up in Big 12 squad shows and on my show how BYU does not play on Sundays due to religious affiliation. They're the flagship university of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the question is posed here that while we're all excited, BYU is going dancing, they're going to play in March Madness, they fall into a 6 seed. They fall into a spot where they can't play on Sundays. They fall in Denver. Could any of this be related? Is any of this tied to BYU's affiliation with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Now, if this were 10, 15 years ago, Drake, I would say absolutely it's related to BYU and the LDS Church affiliation. But since that time, the NCAA Selection Committee has actually been able to gerrymander and move brackets around, move teams to different venues, whatever it is, to accommodate things like BYU's no Sunday play issue. So I look at it, and ever so slightly, were they maybe downgraded from maybe that last 5 seed to the top 6 seed because of religious affiliation? I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's more due to the fact that they're just simply trying to find slots to put BYU in. And if you were to tell me, Drake, it was playing at maybe, and this is all hypothetical at this point, potentially playing a 5 seed and playing in the likes of Lexington or a Providence, Rhode Island, that type of location versus being a 6 seed and playing in Denver, which is an hour and 20 plane minute ride away from home, I will take that 6 seed in that circumstance. I just don't necessarily buy in this day and age the religious affiliation downgrade.
Now, could that be a more of a conversation than of BYU not being able to play on Sundays, which might I add, as someone who's not a member of the faith, but speaks very frequently about the faith because it is such a pillar for BYU, a pillar of their success in the Big 12 as well, because the rallying point worldwide where Cougars, who are part of the LDS Church, are able to celebrate BYU and its accomplishments as something that helps spearhead that church's movement across the world. As someone, again, not a part of the faith, but happy to advocate for the positive things it brings to the Big 12, them not playing on Sundays is a great way to stand your ground and say, look, we are a religious institution that takes it seriously enough. We will not forfeit this piece of what we're committed to. And the NCAA has now said, look, yes, we'll give you that. BYU wasn't going to fold. Eventually, the powers that be had to for the NCAA and governing bodies in college athletics. But the question goes back to, because of that, Jake, and you kind of alluded to this, but I want to go a bit deeper there. Because of not being able to play on Sundays, if BYU could feasibly play on a Sunday, does that mean they're a 4 seed or a 5 seed here, right? Because you take it intrinsically, it's tied to the LDS faith, not really right down the middle, the reason, but because of the Sunday rule, is this why BYU is a 6?
Maybe that, okay, when you put it in that light, Drake, I agree with you in that respect, because it easily could be that where if they had more flexibility, yeah, sure, the selection committee may have said, hey, we can work them into the 5 or 4 line here because they could play a Friday, Sunday situation. This goes back multiple decades, Drake, but there was a push at one point for the NCAA to essentially end all religious exemptions in the case of like a BYU or no Sunday play. They would have just said, hey, if you can't play on Sunday, tough noogies, and you're going to have to just deal with it. But BYU had multiple other universities who owed them no favors step up to the plate and say, no, BYU stands their ground on this. We're going to back them up on this. If they don't want to play on Sunday, make the exemption, put it in the bylaws. And that's been on the books for decades now for the NCAA. BYU will stand that ground until the end of time, Drake. They are not going to budge on it. They've had their rugby team, for example, which is a club sport. I understand that. But their rugby team for multiple decades was unable to win a national championship despite being one of the premier rugby programs across the country because, simply put, the tournament and the final for the rugby national championship was on a Sunday. They wouldn't budge off of it. BYU said, hey, we'll participate, but if we make it to the championship, it's on a Sunday, we'll forfeit. And they did that multiple times. So the light you painted in there, I agree with you. Maybe if they did have that flexibility, hypothetically, yeah, they probably could have found themselves a little bit maybe higher up on the seed line, but I don't think BYU minds standing their ground and doing what they've always done.
I've heard a lot of BYU fans mention as the time has gone on since this was all announced that being a 6 seed, especially in Denver, is actually pretty similar to being a 3 seed. So, it's as gross as it is to be a 6 seed again for BYU. I know there are a lot of war stories that come with that. Being on that line again, is it the same as a 3 seed?
It's gonna worry some Cougar fans, obviously, because of what happened against Duquesne last year. Obviously, there's just bad memories of them they had a record spread last year. It was 11.5, I think, was the spread at tip-off in that game. The biggest spread for a 6-11 matchup in NCAA tournament history, Drake. And we all know what happened. It was just an awful result for BYU, a one-and-done situation once again. I get that there's some of those battle scars that exist because of that, but I'm telling you, if they can find, and we said this earlier on in the podcast, they can find a way past this VCU squad, I feel a lot more confident for BYU against Wisconsin than I do against VCU, and that's crazy to say when it's an 11 versus a 3 seed.
Yeah. Kevin Young and what he's brought to BYU here, I see BYU fans that are still following Mark Pope at Kentucky. They're still following kind of his every move, and they're monitoring him. That situation, the way it ended, the guy who comes in and helps lead a great team, loses to Duquesne, leaves for Kentucky as their 8th option. For BYU fans, what is Kevin Young bringing to the program that this basketball team has never had before?
Elite talent, first off, because BYU's had some pretty good teams in their history, Drake, but they have never had the number 1 recruit in the recruiting class. And I know that's next year with AJ DeBonsa coming to BYU, but the likes of Jaeger Demon and Cannon Catchings are recruits BYU fans always dreamed of having, but never in their heart of hearts were like, hey, that's a realistic possibility for us. Those are guys on this year's team. That's the one thing is he brings a street cred and a recruiting profile that no other BYU coach I feel like can match. He can go out and get essentially anybody he puts his mind to. When he proved he could get AJ DeBonsa to sign with BYU, Stephen A. Smith's face when he announced that on First Take told me everything I needed to know. He was like, are you kidding me, BYU? And it's shown that Kevin Young, his relationships in basketball with pro players like guys like Kevin Durant, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, the fact that he can have them on speed dial, put them on the phone with any recruit that wants to, think about what Joel Embiid thinks about me being a good coach. And you can call up Joel Embiid for a big man and say, hey, Joel, tell this kid what I can do for him in his basketball career. And Joel Embiid will speak glowingly of Kevin Young. That is a major, major tool to have in your back pocket if you're Kevin Young. So the number one thing he's brought is that elite talent base. The other thing I will say is Kevin Young brings a demeanor and it's almost an attitude of, hey, past results be damned. We're going to go out there and do our thing. And I can respect it. It can almost borderline look like they're being cocky when they talk about stuff like that, Drake. But I love the boldness that he approaches his side of the game from.
Yeah, Jake, faith standpoint, culture standpoint as well. I know that's something that is so important to those at BYU. What has Kevin Young brought into the fold that is, and I say brought intentionally, what has he brought into the fold that helps maintain long-term culture at BYU in the athletics department?
I think he's trying to obviously prove that he can send guys to the NBA from BYU. Now, there have been guys who've gone to the NBA from BYU in the past, but we're talking he wants to have lottery-type selections every single year coming out of Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. But he also understands this is a faith-based institution, as we already talked about. They will not bend on certain things that they hold near and dear to their hearts. They're non-negotiables in BYU and the way that the BYU athletics department will always operate. He's trying to meld those two things, and I respect the way he's gone about it. He is bold to the point of saying, we don't care about our past failures in the recent past in the NCAA tournament. We're a new team. We're going to go out there and prove ourselves on that national stage. But at the same time, he also understands that BYU is a faith-based institution and may, frankly, not be for everybody. And he will find the right guys that fit what BYU is all about.
Jake, beautiful stuff today. I know that over the last couple of days, BYU fans have been a bit torn up over the way that things shook out on Sunday. But here you are with a chance, as good as anybody, of the 68 teams to make it all the way to glory and win a national championship. Jake, where can folks, listeners of Locked On Big 12 specifically, find more of your work?
Yeah, I just search out Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcasts. Also available on YouTube. If you want to follow us on social media, Locked On Cougars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And then you can see right here, it's actually our new graphics don't have it. My personal Twitter feed on or X is Jacob C. Hatch. You can hit me up there. I love to chat anytime with anybody who wants to talk ball.
That's Jake Hatch. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day, a crossover with Cougars and Jose Grande.